Hello everyone and welcome to Good Morning Sri Lanka. Today is the 17th of April. It is a Tuesday and I'm Prami here bright and early to say good morning and welcome on the show. Now over the weekend we are going to be experiencing World Earth Day on the 22nd of April, and in relation today we are going to be talking about biodiversity and related issues with a very prominent personality in the field. Professor Sarath Kotagama is in studio with me. Now, for those of us who are very much into environmental issues and who are closet conservationists, his name is not really unknown. We do know of him or have heard of him. He is a professor at the Columbia University for Environmental Sciences, as well as the coordinator of the Field Ontology Group of Sri Lanka. Welcome on the show, sir.
Welcome. Good morning.
Good morning. So, talking about biodiversity, could you tell us the importance of preserving biodiversity within our wetlands?
Let me start by first putting something in place. Because see, now when you started from me, you said about biodiversity and wetlands and Earth Day. 1970, April 22nd. You should never forget that that was the first time in recent history in a developed country that the concerns for the environment was raised by persons in the United States of America. Because it's important for us to recognize that the issues of environment really arose out of a developed country, not in developing countries. The consequence to that was the 1972 Stockholm Conference, where when the countries of the world got together, very clearly it was said that the developing countries had a problem which had to do with the environment quite different from what we know today. And the spokesperson for the developing countries was Madam Indira Gandhi at that time, and she had said that the concerns for the developing countries is poverty, that poverty is the cause for environmental concerns, if at all, if there was any at that time. And that at that time forest degradation was a major issue. So why was the forest being degraded? It was because the people were poor and they had no other choice, and therefore they had to open up the forests, and therefore the forests were lost. The other problem that was happening was the migration of persons into cities, and as a result shanties were coming up in every city everywhere in the world. And why? Because people were poor and they were looking for employment and looking for opportunities to make a living, and therefore they had to come to a place where things were bustling and activity was happening, and that was the city. But coming to the city, you had to find a place to stay, and the only places that was available was the public areas, and therefore next to a avenue or something, railway stations, and then canal systems, all of these things were occupied. Like in the city of Colombo, where we have 55% of the population who are shanty dwellers, evolved the same way everywhere in Bombay. You think of any developing country, it was a problem. So you see, at that time, therefore, it was very clearly said that poverty is the concern or the cause for environmental concerns. 20 years later, we come to 1992, and we have the flip of the statement. We say environmental problems the cause for poverty. So you become poor because of environmental problems. So you see, therefore one has to look at the situation differently. And then at the same change is a new word that evolved in 1992, which is the word that you used, biodiversity. You see, this word never existed before 1986. Before 1986, we as students studied biological sciences. So we had biology and biological diversity. We never had a thing called biodiversity. It evolved only in 1986, and it became an accepted word in 1992, only as what we call a pun, just something to say. It is not yet an international legal term, because the Convention on Biological Diversity does not have the word biodiversity anywhere, not even in the definitions. So you see, you still have to understand that you are using biodiversity as a pseudo-cognate, a word that we coined to enable us to tell the world something different from biological diversity. And that is the use of biological diversity. Right up to 1986 and 1992, when the Convention on Biological Diversity came into being with the acceptance at the Rio Conference, biological diversity was reflected in the way that most of us can and still remember as plants and animals and their diversity. We rarely related this to the use of that biological diversity, which is the major factor today. So that is why we talk of biopiracy and all of these things, because we make use of that biological diversity and commercialize it and also try to benefit out of that activity. So those aspects comes into the picture in 1992. Along with that comes the question of wetlands, because there are two major ecosystems in the world which contribute mostly to the environmental stabilization or balance, which we call today, which is the forest systems and the wetlands. Both of these together bring about what we call environmental ameliorations, stabilized conditions of the environment. Unfortunately, both systems are under threat. In 1971, the Ramsar Convention was discussed in Iran, and we therefore have the Ramsar Convention on wetlands. And very interestingly, you will recognize that if you go to the long term of the Ramsar Convention, it has to do wetlands of international importance for waterfowl. Not what we think of and talk about today. So one has to recall these elements to recognize where we have come and what the value of it is today.
Yes. In relation to the wetlands, we do have a small video to take a look at about the Thalangama wetlands. So let's take a look at that. Well, from that video, sir, would you say that ecosystems such as the Thalangama wetlands are endangered, and the fragility of these ecosystems, are they endangered in any way?
Definitely yes, because you see, one has to recognize where Thalangama is in the first place. It is just at the border of a very dense city, which is the city of Colombo. And for many of those who may recall what Bathramulla was in 1970s, would realize that it is not what it was. Totally different. You see, Thalangama tank is today considered to be a very unique tank in two ways. One, in the city, in the metropolitan of Colombo, it is the only tank that is historically still there. Structurally, it is different from most other tanks, because this has basically been now what we say dammed or structured in a valley, in the middle of a valley. It is not something with a catchment right round and then dammed within the traditional structure. So it has a different form. It has been built around 1550s, somewhere that time. Parakram Bahu the 6th is supposed to have done that. What is interesting is that it still persists despite all the problems that we have seen with respect to land availability. Thalangama tank has in fact provided a boost to the economy of that area. The land value around the tank is much different from the land when you just leave maybe 500 meters away from the tank. That is the value of Thalangama tank. If we fill that tank today, the land value of that area will just slump down to zero. When I say that, I mean, in fact it's about 1 million now around that area. It drops down to about 100,000 very fast within that. So that's one value. At once the Thalangama tank has a value in terms of the commercial land value around it. But in terms of the diversity that it sustains now, the biological diversity, that is what we call the functional purpose that it provides, the protection it gives. And then very recently, we know last year we had these floods, right, and the city went underwater, and more importantly the parliament went underwater for the second time in our history. First time was in 1992, June 5th, World Environment Day. Now last year we had it going underwater again, and the immediate outcome of those two events, 92, resulted in us having to borrow money from the World Bank for the Greater Colombo Environmental Improvement Program, over 100,000 rupees or something, very large amount, which resulted in, for us, for the first time seeing these so-called gabions and things like that, gabial laying and canal systems. Last year when it happened to us, we are now seeing a lot of development in the Batramul area, in the water Sejra area. Then if you come to Talawatugoda side, and everybody is asking why are we digging up and why all these huge structures working like this. That's the consequence. You see, a wetland performs a very important function of retaining the excess water when it flows out. When we build, we prevent the percolation of water into the soil. All the rooftops, the pavements that we structure, the roads that we structure, prevent the water from percolating down to the ground. That has to flow out somewhere, and when it flows out, it has to go and stay somewhere. Yes. So you see, the major function of Thalangama today, in fact, would be simply to say, to prevent the parliament from going underwater. Right?
In relation to that, let's take another look at this video. Okay, so we're going to be taking a little break, but on the other side of this, we will be speaking further to Professor Sarath Kotagama about his recent visit to Jaffna, as well as taking a look at a video on a new data collection center in Iceland. See you guys after this.